Welcome to Building Flutter, a video series where we show you how to contribute to the Flutter framework. In our previous video, we showed you how to set up your environment so that you could start contributing, and today we take our first baby steps by contributing a few very tactical tests. Joining me, as with the previous video, is Taha Tesser. Taha, how are you doing today?
Pretty good. Thanks for having me.
Happy to have you. Well, first, Taha, why don't you let us know what we are actually going to try to accomplish today, and then we'll jump in and see what that's going to require.
Today, we're going to continue from the last video. We're going to update our Flutter setup, which would be outdated by now. And then we're going to look at where to locate a certain issue source. Like in this case, we're looking at examples. So we're going to locate where the examples are and how we track the example test. And then we're going to add some missing tests. And we have a tracker here with a bunch of missing tests. So you can contribute, anybody in the community can contribute some missing tests to make the examples are testable, to make sure they don't break. And yeah, we will show you like how to go through the whole process.
And what are the examples, just for people who maybe haven't found that part of the repo? What purpose do those examples serve for the Flutter framework? Are they made available are they published to any type of example app, or do they only exist in the repository? What's the story behind examples?
That's a very good question. Just like any framework, when you go to documentation, you get an explanation of an API. Let's just say elevated button. You see it's elevated button, what this does, what is an elevated button, and then it tells you how to implement that. In Flutter, we have an interactive example and a code snippet. In most of the widgets, like material widget, Cupertino widget, you get an interactive example. So it's just a small window that you have. It's a .pad preview example. We call it a .pad example, where the first left half of it is the code where you can see what is the actual code of this widget. And then on the right, you can see a preview. And the list we have here, these examples are already there. Like if you go to api.flutter.dev, you search for a widget, you land on a widget page, and then you find an example is already there. You can play with that example, tweak colors, and play, or you can copy paste it into your own app. And these examples can be very simple to like very complex. And a couple of years ago, we migrated some of the examples from snippet, where you can't interact with them. They're just there. You can just copy paste them. But now we have many interactive examples. So here you can see on the left, we have the code itself for a widget, in this case, OverflowBar. And then we have interactive preview. So you can click on the button, you can reload the example. This works like a VS Code. You can even edit and change text in this example. And behind the scene, these examples are located in a project folder called example/API. It's part of the overall example. It's called API examples. And then these are just regular examples. And then we make sure we add tests for these examples. Whenever there is a new Flutter release, we make sure that we are not breaking these examples. And if somebody visits api.flutter.dev, they're able to interact with this example. And if somehow this example is broken, we catch it before it goes into stable channel. So
okay, so these examples are used on the website where people look up the documentation, like we just showed. Of course, if you're going to show people examples, you don't want those examples to ever break, and therefore we write tests that verify some details of the examples. And those examples, the ones that appear again over on api.flutter.dev, those examples live in the Flutter/Flutter repository under this examples directory here. So if we open examples, here's essentially the place where all of those documentation examples live. And today, we're going to find a few of those examples where the example exists, but no one has written any tests, which means they could actually break on the documentation website because no one has added tests to make sure that they don't. Is that right?
Yes, but let me give you a reason why there are no tests for these examples. Like I mentioned earlier, like we migrated this non-interactive code snippets. They were just previews. They were not like a .pad interactive example. You couldn't interact with those examples. And there was a process where somebody in the team spent a lot of time to move those examples into interactive examples. But obviously, it requires a lot more effort to write tests for each and every single example, which is why we have this thread with missing examples. It's not like these examples were added without tests. They were just migrated from those static snippet code samples. And let me go to the documentation page to see like what this example, scroll up a little bit. You can see here there is a description. Under the blue box, you can see there is a description there. This description is not part of the actual documentation. It's part of this example description. So anything in that blue box is part of this example. And when you look at this, this widget, in this case, OverflowBar, we can locate this, the text inside this blue box, which is just for .pad. To look at this, what I do is, if you scroll all the way up, whenever you land on a widget page, there is a page button on the top right. When you click that button, you land on a source class of this particular widget. So here you can see we immediately landed on OverflowBar widget. So this is the source of that widget. And this blue box text where the description is, because most often you will write a description, you link the example, and then you write example test. So here, like Matt highlighted .pad tag. In this .pad tag, all the text that is in this tag is part of that blue box. If you see this, it says this example defines, the same text will be inside that blue box. And there is a source here, the last line is C code in. The C code in, if you open this in VS Code, we will later update our fork, and then we will see this line, because it's important to also link to the source. So if the example is not properly linked, or you are adding a new example, we will have to place this source, this tag, and then provide a clear description. In this case, we have a really nice description, and this links to a source. So in this case, it says example/API. Example is the root folder, so we can go to all the way to Flutter homepage. That's the root folder, and then we can go path by. So we can go example/API, lib, widget, OverflowBar, which is the class name. So in this case, we are in the class overflow_bar dot. So the same name would exist in examples.
I think probably the easiest way to show this is to just do it. But before we start opening that up, I do think we need to make sure that our local Flutter is up to date with the real Flutter.
Yes.
So we showed last time, again, how to set up the environment, which included creating or cloning a second version of Flutter that's just for development. Now, I haven't touched this for the last couple of weeks because that's how long it's been since our last video. The master channel, therefore, has accumulated probably dozens or hundreds of commits in that time. So I think, so Flutter Dev, by the way, is the name of the tool. Flutter Dev is what we're calling our development version of Flutter. Now, Taha, if I want to just find out the status of things, my version versus the real version of Flutter, or the central version of Flutter, do I just do a fetch of upstream? Will that tell me?
Yes, but in some cases, if you care about the changes, you can track the changes. But in this case, we don't care about the changes. We want to have the latest one. So whatever version we have, we don't care about it. We want the latest one. So we can fetch the upstream master branch in this case, and then we can pull it.
Okay, so because so I should be able to do this from where I am. We've currently opened the examples inside of our development version of Flutter, and therefore I should be able to access Git directly here for the repository. So I should be able to say Git fetch upstream, which will take. Yeah. Well, we're just it'll grab all the stuff. So now our local version is aware of what's going on upstream. I guess we've set this to track origin instead of upstream, but now that we know the latest stuff from the central Flutter repository, we can say we can either do pull, or we can say git fetch upstream master to master, which takes the latest stuff from the central repository and applies it to our version of Flutter. Let's see here. Maybe not. Maybe that won't. Let's see. Git pull upstream master. Maybe this is what's needed for the two different locations. Okay. So I guess, that's the version I set up here, git fetch. That's what I use all the time. I bet it's because we're on master. That's what it is. Sorry, I forgot that we're on master already. You can't fetch the latest for a branch when you're on that branch, but you can run a git pull, which will actually merge the remote stuff directly into your branch. So with that said, if we do now a git status, we're on master. Now, strangely enough, it says that we're ahead by 208 commits. And that's because we have our own version of Flutter in GitHub, which is not up to date, right? That got stale. So now on my computer, we've pulled down the latest stuff from the real version of Flutter, but our version on GitHub is still behind. So Taha, in this situation, do you then immediately push those changes to your version on GitHub?
Yes, like in this case, we have 200 commits, so they are substantial. And then I usually check my Git fork, because I usually like to make sure that my page is properly synced there. So I keep it side by side. So here on the page, it says 201 and 208. So push it, and then you will see like it is synced. It says up to date.
So we pulled from upstream, but now we're going to push to origin. So we'll do git push origin master, and then we'll come back and we'll refresh the GitHub page here for our end. And now it says this branch is up to date with Flutter master. So now there's the real version of Flutter on GitHub, there's our version of Flutter on GitHub, and there's the local version on my computer. They are all now equally up to date.
Perfect.
All right. So now let me pause for just a moment so I can increase this font size for everyone. And I think maybe we need to do a Flutter pub git here. Is that why all this stuff is red?
Inside API folder. I think we're in that like a parent folder. We should open direct API only.
Okay. Okay, so font size is increased. Quick thing we just realized is I opened up the examples directory overall, but it turns out we just want to open up examples/API. So I'm going to do that now and we'll be right back. Okay, we've opened up examples/API in Android Studio, and there are a bunch of red squigglies everywhere. So often the very first thing you need to do, if you open up a project of any kind, Dart or Flutter of any kind, and there's a bunch of red stuff everywhere, it's probably because you haven't run either a Dart pub git or a Flutter pub git. So we're going to do that now. We're going to say Flutter pub git. That's resolving dependencies. Going to tap somewhere in here so the analysis runs. And it still looks like we've got a bunch of red squigglies. So I think...
Let me tell you why. Let me tell you why we have this error.
Yeah, so everyone
because you use Flutter pubget
sure did.
Of Flutter dev.
See, there's a lesson. We're learning in real time. This is how you make mistakes. Flutter dev pub git. That's what we want. Okay, now it's going to download a new version of the engine because apparently the engine has been changed and recompiled since the last time we did this. Now it's resolving dependencies. Got dependencies. Now it's going to do some final cleanup. Okay, downloading more packages. Okay, now analysis does its stuff, and you'll notice there's no more red over here in the project. But apparently Android Studio thinks Gradle is involved with everything, so that's going to do some nonsense for a minute.
While this is thinking, yeah, okay, this is done.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Was there something you wanted to point out?
Yeah, like while this is thinking, like I wanted to go to the actual source because, like I mentioned, like we would actually go to the source where the description is, where the like example link is. then we can come
Yeah.
back here. So
I could
if you
just
could
jump
open,
directly. I could just jump directly, but why don't we actually drill down through the directory so people can see where it is? Do you know which one of these we want to go into?
yeah, it's the same structure as the widget. So if it is a material widget, it will be inside the material folder.
So
If it is
examples
a Cupertino
API
widget-
lib. So it's actually, well, in terms of the overflow bar, it's actually under widgets. So widgets overflow bar. So we will go, whoops, wrong window. We will go to widgets down here, and then at this level, so there's an overflow bar directory in here somewhere, overflow bar. Here's the overflow bar.
Yes.
And now we have overflow bar.0.dart. Now, is that .0 there? Is that because there can be multiple examples? So every file has a number?
Yes. If it is about the same widget, we start from 0, 1, 2, 3. If it is a property specific, then you can say overflow bar / property name, then 0.dart. It's just to serialize the number of widget for a number of examples for a widget.
Got it. And this here, if you were paying attention out there when I was showing you the API website, this was literally the code right here that we were running. And I even changed overflow bar to hello and ran it again. So we are now looking at the exact code that was loaded into the documentation website.
Yes.
Okay. So where do we want to go from here?
We know that according to that issue, there is no test for this example. So we can go to the same structure, same directory structure inside the test folder.
Test
widget / overflow bar.
And we'll notice that there's no overflow bar here. So we're going to create an overflow_bar directory under widgets.
The same names to make sure they follow the same directory structure.
Yep. So that,
as
to be clear, that name, directory name matches this directory name. So we'll come back down here into tests. This is our new directory name, and we will say new Dart file, and we will say overflow bar. Now here's a question. Does the test go before the number? So it's test.0.dart?
I will tell you a shorter way. You can cancel this. Because the names can be long and they can be short, so I will make it easier. So go to the example, go to the example file. This is the example file. Copy this whole text. So this way you don't have to worry about what's the name of the widget and yada yada yada. Copy the whole thing, even the ... Okay, it's okay. Copy it, the whole thing, yeah. Then you can go to the test folder. Then after the number, add _test. So this way you don't have to remember anything else.
Like that?
Yes.
Really? That's an odd place for it. Overflow bar .0_test.dart. Okay. Well,
Yeah.
whatever.
If it is 1, it would be 1_test, 2_test.
Okay.
We want it to be before extension, so before ...
Yeah, probably for those wondering why it goes in that particular spot, most likely is, so the tool automatically identifies tests, but the tool identifies tests by name. And more specifically, the tool probably looks for any file that literally ends with _test.dart. And therefore that number 0, it can't go after the test. It has to go before the _test. So
Exactly.
with that said, so now we have our empty test file. We'll probably want to do a little bit of hand holding here because I think most Flutter developers, unfortunately, don't write many tests, if any. So we want to be crystal clear here with what we're doing. So how do you want to level set this? What should people be thinking when they reach this point? What's the first step to filling in a file like this?
Yeah. The reason why we are making this whole video about writing tests with example, in my opinion, is it's a lot easier to test an example. Because the goal to test an example is not to test how the widget works. It's not to test all the properties of a widget. In this case, we want to make sure that this example is working. And if it is a little bit complex, we want to make sure the complexity or the interactiveness is tested. For example, if there is example, okay, no pun intended. If there is an example with a button in it, and then you can interact with the example with just the button, then in that case, we will write test to interact with that button. But in this case, we don't have to do anything to open overflow bar. It's already there. So it will be a very simple test
So
to make sure we have OverflowBar.
So you say to make sure it's working. Of course,
Yes.
part of the trick is to define what working means. In this case, are you saying that if it compiles and runs without throwing an exception, is that all we have to check to make sure that it's working?
No. If it throws an exception, it will be already caught by the Flutter testing system, like the whole pre-checks and post-checks. In this case, we need to make sure that the example is expected. Like, I shouldn't say like working, but it is expected. So in this case, imagine we wrote this example. We wrote an example where OverflowBar is showing, and we have 3 buttons here. We have a placeholder widget here. So all we have to do is make sure there is a OverflowBar in this example, and then it has those buttons. That's it. What you see is what you're testing in this case, and it's pretty simple. So in this case, first we need to load the example inside the test. Unlike regular widget where you have your own widget inside the test, in this case we will use the example to load that widget.
Let me ask one more question here. So this is going to be, I think, a difference between maybe testing an example and testing an actual widget implementation. Yeah. So I want to be clear about this. If we had actually created OverflowBar, one of the things we would want to test, for example, is that the buttons, not only do they exist, but they take up the width that we think they take up, because laying out the buttons is actually one of the primary responsibilities of the OverflowBar. But the reason we're not going to test that is because, in theory, whoever implemented OverflowBar in the framework already wrote those tests, already made sure that the layout works. So all we need to do is make sure that the actual widget is visible, exists in the demo. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. Like, we are just testing that it is there and it has the expected behavior. So for example, if the widget is not showing, then it's not a proper example. It's just a blank screen or something. We don't want that. So the test will verify that this example is just behaving as it should be.
Okay, got it. And now we're here with this scary empty file. So what's the first step to start filling in this example test file?
I will just tell you what I do. So we are inside a widget directory. So in this case, if I was writing this test, I will go to another widget directory test and copy the whole test. So pick whatever widget, copy the whole class, and then paste in our empty file so it will not look scary. And then there is a lot of like unrelated stuff here. So what I would do is I will remove everything but keep pump widget and title.
Do we always
inside
want the
test
same?
widget? No. That should be there. That's just
so
copyright.
I'm verifying. So whenever we copy the file, there's going to be a copyright at the top, and even though it says 2014, we're going to keep it exactly as it is, right?
Yes.
Okay. And then you saying remove all the contents of the test widgets?
Yes, except pump widget. Keep pump widget there.
Okay, we'll
and
keep
remove
pump
everything
widget,
else.
And we will remove all the expectations here. And then obviously the name doesn't match. Do we start with the name or do we start with the implementation?
First, we will look at the import because like we talked about earlier, we're testing example here. So we need to import the correct example because we copied it to save time. It will also give us correct location. So in this case, we can just replace the widget name.
So we can say overflowbar / overflowbar.0.dart. This is our source code now, which already exists. Someone already created that. And I guess we're namespacing it to example. I'm not entirely sure why, but that's what's already there, so we'll keep it. And now we are importing our example, which now we see this red squiggly, and that's probably because our example has a different name. So I think we probably want example.overflowbar example app. Is that right?
Perfect. So in this case, now we have correct example loaded. So now we're going to think like what we're doing with this test. This is a one test. Inside this main, we have test widget. This is a single test. So we should name this test to define what is the purpose of this test. So you could name it whatever you want, but it should be something that's a little bit descriptive of the test. So for example,
so this
in this
is
case,
this is another place where people will probably get confused. I think Most, especially junior developers, they really struggle with giving useful names to things. Now, we've said that in the case of this demo, again, just so everyone can see it and remember, these three buttons belong to a bar, and really that's what we're testing here, whatever that means. The placeholder is there, but it's not really relevant. The card is there. It's not really relevant. The primary concern is the bar that holds these three buttons. And so, Taha, when you think about what it means for this example to work, how would you describe what we're verifying with regard to what we're seeing here?
First, I will verify what is this shadowy box thing. So to make sure where this where this overflow bar is located. So
we have a piece of material right here, which is colors white, elevation 24, rounded border. So that's where the card is coming from. And then we have some padding inside the card. And then I'm not entirely sure why there's a scroll view, I guess just in the rare case that there's not enough vertical height. But this is all decoration, right? And then eventually we get this overflow bar right here, which is what we actually care about. That's aligned to the center bottom, essentially, of the column. So there's the placeholder here, which has a constant height of 128. And then essentially below that, actually this alignment is probably unnecessary. I'm not sure why it's in there. But below the placeholder, here is our overflow bar, and that's what we care about.
Yes, you're definitely right, because when I look at this example, I see there's a lot going on. But that's not, like, our purpose is to test overflow bar. And if in some cases it could be essential to test where it is placed, and like it depends on the example, but in this case we don't have to worry about that. So when we say, if we go back to test, when we say this pump widget overflow bar example, the entire example we just saw is being loaded in our test. So we have everything what we have seen in the .py example. So now whatever that was there, we can test it.
Another quick point to everyone. A widget test, where any test that you run with test widgets is called a widget test. And the name's a little bit misleading. A widget test actually runs an entire fake version of Flutter on your machine where you're running the tests. And the reason I say fake is for two major reasons. Reason number one is that by default, no pixels are actually painted. There's no reason to paint pixels if you can't see them, so Flutter just skips that entire part. Second, it's fake because the passage of time is simulated. Why is it simulated? Well, if you have animations in your code or even certain kinds of timers, you obviously don't want to actually wait for seconds or a dozen seconds or 30 seconds in a test. You want it to run as fast as humanly possible, so the passage of time is greatly accelerated in tests. And for those two reasons, it's a fake version of Flutter. But when you see pump widget, what that essentially means is it tells the fake version of Flutter to apply the widget tree that you pass in here, kind of like when you call run app in your actual application. That's kind of what pump widget does here, is it inflates an entire widget tree with whatever you pass. And then after that widget tree is inflated, just like it would be calling run app, we can kind of poke and prod it and see what's there and what isn't there and what text and what buttons and all that kind of stuff. So with that said, sorry to interrupt. I just want to make that clear for everyone. So you were saying, Taha?
No, that's a great explanation. And yeah, like if you're writing this test for the first time, you might not know. But I think most developers would know like what is test, and especially like if they're writing tests for the framework. But in this case, like we don't have actual overflow bar inside the test widget. We are loading the example. So that's important to know, because we are not testing the widget, we are testing the example.
That's right. So in terms of this updating this name, so the previous test that we copied, the name as an example, the name was can use overlay to highlight navigation bar destination. So the test that we copied looks like it's actually verifying something rather specific. How would you change this name to reflect what we want to verify for our specific example?
Like I said, like there are many ways to go about this. Like you could test if there are buttons in this overflow bar, which is the main purpose of overflow bar. We want to see like the buttons are laid out inside this overflow bar. So I would say test buttons, like I have to come up with the title right away.
How about
OverflowBar
bar is visible with buttons?
Overflow bar will be visible anyway. I would say like it has like
But
contains buttons.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Are you sure it's there?
Yeah.
Let me pose the question this way, because here's what I'm thinking. Like, imagine that we came down here and we said verify that button 1 exists, and then maybe we do that. There are 3 buttons, so maybe we do that 3 times. When you're thinking from a QA perspective, it's actually possible I could make this pass without there even being an overflow bar.
You're right. And that's not how, like, I have seen like beginners doing this. They find widget and they say, oh, I found this widget, find one widget. We will talk about that a little bit later. But the example, the test we will write will verify that these buttons are inside overflow bar, which is how I would phrase it. Because we will say, okay, we have this button inside overflow bar, and when we say inside overflow bar, it will find overflow bar, so it is there.
How about that? Overflow bar displays buttons.
Contains, I would say contains. But it's fine if you say displays, like because usually we say contain or it has something, but it's fine. We can go about that. So now we have a title, and like you don't have to create a perfect title. I would say the title is not the whole story. The main test is the whole story. The title could be rephrased. Like I have written many tests where the title has to be rephrased or it has to be like modified a little bit. But the title is not the main thing. It's very easy to fix title, but it's a lot harder to write the test. So don't stress about the title if you don't know. In fact, like if you can't even like write it properly, just write whatever you want. Then somebody who review it would probably suggest you a better title. So here, when we say pump widget, so we have this example, and like Matt says, like those buttons could exist anywhere. But first, I have to check what those buttons are. So if you interact with the examples again, like go to the example and see what are those buttons, what type they have, and what the text are.
So in 2 of them are text buttons, and we can see the first one says cancel, the second one says really, really cancel, but the third button is actually an outlined button widget, which then contains text that says okay.
Perfect. So we have 3 buttons, and they all have different text, and they all have like a couple of them are similar. Another one is a little bit different. So first, to begin with, for beginners, complete beginners, I would say let's find those buttons inside the test just to verify that we have it. It's not going to be final test, but sometimes I break it down just so you can go further. Okay. So now we can say expect, and we're going to find a button. We could find button 2 ways, like most commonly. You can find a button by a type. We have 2 types of buttons. We have text button and outline button. So let's actually do that just to see that we have those type of buttons.
And remember, we have 2 text buttons, which means we're going to find n widgets.
Let's actually put 1 widget. I want to go through the error. Sometimes you will get an error. Okay. Just so that we will learn something.
And now we'll also look at how to run this. And and we can specify the file. So we can say flutter dev test. And this file we said was under widgets, under overflow bar. And there's only 1 test file. And there's only 1 test in the test file. We created this file. Yes, we created this. And I'll say go ahead and run that test. And we expect it to fail.
Maybe. Who knows? Let's see.
Okay, 1 test failed. Now, why did it fail? We'll come up here to the root of the error, and we see an expected and we see an actual. Expected exactly 1 matching candidate, meaning 1 matching widget, but we found 2 widgets of type text button. And that's because there are 2 of them, and we said there's only 1. That's why our expectation failed.
Before you fix that, I wanted to say something. It says exactly 1 matching candidate, but your expectation is find 1. It doesn't say find 1 widget. It should say find 1 widget. It shouldn't say find 1. So we don't have correct expectation as well. So if you try to edit
let's verify that. So if we outline button, there actually is only one.
Yeah, that's a good idea because we have one.
And that passes. Because these expectations, even though we're dealing with widgets,
Yeah.
these matchers are not specific to widgets at all. You can expect all sorts of different stuff, and you can use all sorts of different matchers. And in fact, you can define your own matchers that you put in here. Now, in this particular case, what Taha was talking about is that in addition to this finds one, there's also finds one widget. But I believe one of those was fully deprecated. Let me see which one it was. So finds one widget seems to be still around. Let's check finds one. I could have swore that one of these was deprecated.
They're the same. Yeah.
Right. Well, usually you don't want two different things that do the same thing. And so if there was a new one, typically you want to get rid of the old one. I could have, or maybe actually one of them was just flat out added in a recent version. Because I remember that in one project, I was using one of these and not the other. And then I went to commit the change and it broke the build because I was on master and this matcher was only available on master, but the build was unstable. But we'll read the official documentation. So for this one is finds one widget. The official documentation says asserts that the finder locates exactly one widget in the widget tree. This is equivalent to the preferred finds one. Okay, so now preferred. So if you're going to use one of these, use finds one because the team has said that's the one that we intend for you to use for this case.
In this case, we will use find one because, to be honest, like I haven't used find one. And if you look at the...
And here's a screw up. We should maybe fix this. I don't know, but someone left the old code in here.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. We're looking at the wrong. See, this is how easily it is to get confused. We're looking at finds one widget. That's fine. Okay, so back here in our test, forget all the stuff you just saw in the framework. We're going to say finds one for the outline button because that's the matcher that the Flutter team thinks that we should use. Now, with that expectation, that when expectation actually passes, do we keep that expectation or do you want a different version of that expectation?
In this case, it is correct. The outline is one. So
how
this is not going to be final test. Let me just tell you, this is not going to be final test. This is just for the learning purposes. So you can duplicate this line and find test button. But in this case, there was an error. So we find more than one.
Right. But then we said that if instead we did text button finds n, which means finds the number that we say. And if we say find 2, then come back here into the terminal, run the test again. And it still passes, which means we found 2 text buttons. We found 1 outline button.
That's right. But this does not prove that these buttons are inside OverflowBar. So, but I still sometimes write like this just to see that what I have. So now we expect these buttons exist. We have seen them, most importantly, and then we have tested them. So we know there are no more than 3 buttons. And how do we know these buttons are inside OverflowBar? Some people say, okay, let me type OverflowBar. So you say, okay, there is an OverflowBar. So those buttons exist, OverflowBar exists. Could you copy this line and find OverflowBar as well? Yeah.
Okay, we're going to say that there's exactly
test,
1 OverflowBar.
Yeah.
And it passes. So there is an OverflowBar. There are 2 text buttons. There's 1 outline button. And Taha, why is that not enough?
The reason why it's not enough, because these widgets exist. We don't know if they are related to each other or if they are nested within each other. And now we have a green check. We have a green test. We could modify the example and this test will still pass. So if we go to example and move this button outside OverflowBar, inside the same column or the signal child scroll in this case.
So here are the buttons. And we can cut those buttons out entirely. And so here's the OverflowBar. We're going to put them at the bottom of the column. So now the buttons are not in the OverflowBar. They're outside the OverflowBar, which means it's not what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, and the example should work fine. There is no example error. If you run this example, if you have Chrome, like if you want to run on the example, you can see the example is still working fine.
I lost you for a second there. I lost your audio there, so I missed what you were saying.
I wanted to say that when you move this button outside OverflowBar, the
and I
example is
lost
still
him
valid.
again.
We
I'm
don't
going to
have
run
any
this test and
red
prove
lines.
that it still passes.
Yes.
So we'll see that the test passes. So we've broken it. We know we've broken what we wanted this example to be, and yet our test still passes, which means there's something in our test that isn't the way it should be. Yeah. Okay. So Taha,
Exactly.
Can I hear you now? Can you say something? Okay.
Yep, I can hear you.
Okay. What's next?
Now we have modified the example, but our test still passes, which tells us that our example is not robust enough to catch this mistake. And it's not doing its job. It's not effective. In this case, adding an example would be it's not adding any value because it's just testing. It exists there, but it's not actually doing its job. So our test passed even after modification. So now I always do this when I have a complex example. I want to make sure the example fails. Then I fix the code to make my example pass. So we will write a test that should fail. Then we recorrect our example, it should pass. So that verifies that whatever test we're changing, whatever test we're writing, it verifies that it is valid. And if somehow the source code changes, our test fails. That verifies that the test is valid and it is doing its job. So let's start with one widget for simplicity. We expect a button, one of the buttons, to be inside OverflowBar. So let's go with that. So we can say finder. We can have a finder to find a button inside OverflowBar. So you can start with a variable in this case. Instead of expect, like we find a variable finder. If you write finder. The reason why I wanted to write finder, because I will tell you the type. Okay, you should write type actually because the types are necessary. Otherwise, the check will fail. They should always mention type in the source code.
Well, I don't know if I agree with that or not. So let's finish this line, and then I'll decide if I agree with what you're saying.
It's not about agreeing. This is a requirement. So
I want to see. I only see half the line here. So what's the other half of the line? And then we'll look at the type.
I lost you there.
And I seem to keep losing your audio here. So if you're watching this video, the reason that he's talking and I'm not responding is because I can't hear him. Okay, so I think I can hear you again now, Taha. So real quick, what's the other half of this line?
Yeah, so we need to find this button is a descendant of OverflowBar. So we say find.descendant.
Okay, and then that's got two pieces in it. And just because the text is really large, I'll put a comma in here and separate that. So matching is what we had down below. We're trying to find a text button, and we're trying to find that inside of another thing, which we already found our overflow bar above. So inside the overflow bar, we want to find a text button, right?
Yes, but in this case, we're saying like just find text button. So we will get number of items. So we will use this finder to find our expectation, like match our expectation in this case.
Yes. Now, as for the type, missing type annotation. So you're telling me that the Flutter framework has decided that every variable needs to have a type declaration?
Yes.
Okay. So we will do that because it's required. That should be totally unnecessary. And if you're using Flutter in your own projects, there's absolutely no need for you to put the type. In fact, Dart as a language, one of the changes it made was that it automatically infers types. It's not all that new now. It's probably a few years old. But for that very reason, just declaring final is almost always enough. The only time you really need a type is either when it could be multiple things or when reading the code, it's not clear what it is. But because there's a lint rule, apparently, we will follow the rules here in the framework. And what is the type? Finder?
Yes.
Okay. So now So we expect this to actually to fail because we broke the example, right? So
yeah,
this should fail. Let's see what happens when we run the test. All right, -1 test failed. Why did it fail? So we expected to find 2 text buttons, but in fact, we only found 0. And that's because inside the overflow bar, there are 0 of them. I think, Taha, let's go back now and let's fix that. We'll do just the 2 text buttons, and then we'll come back in a moment and do the outline button. So now the text buttons are back in the overflow bar. Let's run our test, same test again. And now it passes. So now those expectations are good, and we're going to repeat this one more time down here. And I think in this case, now maybe this is stylistic here, Taha, but I would declare the finder directly in the expectation. Is there a policy on the framework team that whenever you're looking for a descendant, you're supposed to declare it outside the expectation?
There is no policy, but this is just for readability. So because like sometimes this descendant can be a widget type, so you have to type tester.widget, and then you have like multiple lines, and then you have conditions like this, like off matching and then type. So
just
for readability, there is no requirement.
I'll compare the two. We'll keep it consistent, but I will at least show people what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
This line right here is totally legal. And in fact, in Flutter Bounty Hunter projects, this is probably how we would do it because we tend to prefer inline declarations versus assigning a bunch of variables in a function. So here you get the exact same result. We'll prove that it passes, and then I will change this to match what we did a moment ago with the local variable. Well, this will fail first, then we'll fix it. Yeah. So this will fail because our example is still broken. So -1, it failed. We'll come back to the example. We'll take the outline button.
To be precise, like it's not broken, but it's just not as we expected because the buttons are still working fine, but they are outside OverflowBar.
Yes, that's correct. That's what I mean when I say broken, is that the desired example is broken, but the code compiles and runs. But now we'll run our test again with the outline button moved into the bar, and now we'll see that all tests pass. So we found all 3 buttons, and those buttons are inside of the bar. Now, I said a moment ago that we'll stick to a consistent style here, so I'll copy, well, actually, I'll say final. And this, by the way, this is one of the reasons why it's kind of annoying to declare things, because now it's like, what is it? What should it be called?
No. I would not do finder 2. You can reassign finder.
Okay, so
you
now
don't have to create another one.
So we'll do that, but here again, the cost is that we have introduced mutable values when unneeded. So again, as Taha said, it's a preference, but those are the reasons why in the Flutter Bounty Hunter projects, our preference is to declare inline whenever possible, so that we don't kind of litter the space with variables and we don't create mutable variables when not necessary.
I am getting cut out a little bit, but I wanted to say there are a couple of ways to go about this. You say like, oh, we don't have we are creating mutable objects. In this case, like there is no one way to write this, but still there are some things we need to have, like type. We need to have a type. If you want to have inline finder, it's fine. There is no like hard rule. Just for readability, like I prefer the finder. In fact, you can see like a lot of places we have a variable finder for readability. So you can go through the finder lines first, then you can match the expectation, because the expectation get very complex, the finder get very complex. So it's better to separate them. But in this case, if I was writing this test, I would not reassign finder. I just wanted to tell you that you don't have to create another one. But for readability, again, you could also say that this is a test buttons finder and outline button finder, or you could just put all of them together. Like you can have a button finder method. In that button finder method, you can define a type, and based on type, it will find those widgets. So let's actually do that just to show that how this can be cleaned up. You can reuse the code. So I would say go on the after pump widget. You can create a method which returns a finder. You can say buttons finder.
You want to create an inline method?
Yes, for this buttons. So we can start that returns finder. It needs to be a finder return. So we can just test how many finders we get, how many widgets we get. In this, you can say buttons finder. And this, it will take a type. So it will take whatever type we can give. I don't know the exact parameter name. The type, I think it takes finder because it's a type as well. Find dot by type. So it's a finder actually. So you can say finder and then button type.
You've lost me. I don't know what you're asking me to do.
Okay. You know, when we have this off and matching, so there are finders there. Find dot. If you scroll down a little bit, you already have returned this. So we need to provide a type for those finders.
Well,
so
there's a type.
I think it's widget type. Is that the correct one?
Again, you're saying you're talking about finders. I understand that, but then you say we need to take a type. I don't. That's where a type for what? Because here's a type. We're taking a type, right?
Okay.
So is there something? Is this missing something?
I think it should be fine. Like I got a little bit confused if it is a widget type or finder type, something like that. Okay, we can go about. We can see if it will find or not. So here we return the find dot ancestor. So whatever type we provide, it will find those widgets, and then we get a single finder. So you can say return find dot ancestor. So this will take OverflowBar to match with, and then it will find whatever type we provide. So if you say find dot by type, then OverflowBar. So this will find inside the OverflowBar widget. And then the matching is flexible. So in matching, whatever type we have, we provide matching. So we find both buttons, like text button and outline button, within the same file. So this is what I meant. It throws an error here. So here, find dot by type. Yeah. So this parameter will be flexible. So we can use this button finder to find whatever we want inside OverflowBar. Do you understand?
Okay.
Yeah. So now we can replace the finder, if it was called finder, inside the expectation. So you can delete the finder we have here, and then inside expect we use button finder, and we provide type. Then we can say 2, and we can repeat the same thing for outline button. It was clear. I got a little bit confused because of the connection issues.
Yeah, me too. It keeps going in and out. This line here we can get rid of because we're implying the existence of an overflow bar in the other expectations. So I will say that so we'll prove that this passes, by the way, just to make sure everyone knows the code still passes. It doesn't pass. Okay, what did we screw up?
It says exactly to finder, test button.
Should this really be ancestor or should this be descendant?
Descendant. Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, and it passes. So I'll say this. We've seen 3 different ways to represent the same set of expectations. One example creates individual finders along the way and then passes them to expectation methods. The other approach is very similar. Instead of declaring finders, you can instead of assigning finders, you can declare them directly as the first argument here. And then option number 3 is to create a function in line that creates the finder for you. What I will say, personally, I would never do this. And the reason I would never declare an inline method is because from a reader perspective, it requires your brain to become a compiler, which then separates what's actually running in your tests from stuff that's then called elsewhere in your test at a given time. There may be people with this preference. In Taha, you may prefer this as well. Everybody has their preference. I would never introduce this complexity unless there's a very exceptional situation. I would just declare the finder directly and expect 9 times out of 10. That's just my personal 2 cents.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like I said, everybody have their own preference, but when it comes to a contribution, we need to be consistent, and I try to be consistent at least because it makes it really difficult if there are new patterns and a different behavior to read the code. And in this case, like for me, it is clean because I have found a lot of items in the widget. So, and in this case, like we are reassigning the finder, which was my goal. Like I didn't want to reassign it. I just wanted to show you like we could reassign it. You don't have to say 2. And there are some code bases where you say 1, 2, 3. That's far worse than using this, in my opinion, than creating multiple finders with each numbers. So you could go about just using the inline finders. I think it would be acceptable. It would not be like something, okay, you can't do it. This is just my way. Like if I was writing it, I would do this. But like in certain cases, like there are merits to both. Like where I have written tests where you need to have a flexible finder located somewhere so I can reuse it in multiple tests, not just one test, like several tests inside the same file. So in that case, like I wouldn't assign inline finder because I would have to copy each and every finder. If I have even one place, I could reuse it entire class, and there could be like 20 instances of the same finder. So it will reduce the number of lines dramatically.
Okay, so I guess we should probably avoid, we've probably gone into the weeds even more than we needed to on this one because this is people that are just committing their first test. So maybe we'll come back in a future episode and we'll get deeper into the different tactics that you can use in tests. At the end of the day, I mean, this test is verifying that 3 buttons exist, right? There's not a whole lot going on here, but do you feel that this is now sufficient to say that we have tested this particular example?
I would say this, if you scroll up the ancestor thing, like not everybody write ancestor and descendant, like find.descendant and ancestor. Like when I started contributing, I didn't know about find.descendant for a year maybe. Because you could still contribute and you could still like figure out how to write tests. You don't have to know like every type of finder, for example. You don't have to know like how to write the best test, how to write like the perfect title. You don't have to do that. You just have to start. Pick the example, write test. If it is if it is remotely functional and is doing its expected job, in this case, if we modify this, if we move this button outside OverflowBar, our test is correct. It doesn't matter if it is perfect. It is doing its job. And you could see this similar contribution by the community. Like they're writing all kinds of tests. Some are less complex than others, but there is no one type of test. You could write it as long as it's doing its job. It should fail before if you make any changes to the code. That's the minimum barrier. If it doesn't do that, then it's not the right test. So if it passes, it's fine.
So again, just to be clear, for this example, do you believe that we have verified the details, the full set of details that are needed for this test?
Yeah, we have the minimum viable test.
Okay. Well, minimum viable suggests that we might want more in this test. But I guess the question is, are we done with this test?
Yes, definitely. I would say, yeah. We don't have to write another test because it does its job to find that there is the overflow bar and it has buttons and we have an example. That's it.
Okay, I lost you there, but I'm assuming the answer was yes.
Yeah.
One thing I'm going to add here. So again, we'll commit this as is, or at least put up a PR as is. Something to keep in mind, because we just wrote this inline method, we fully understand why we did it. But imagine reading this test, knowing nothing about it, and just kind of reading from top to bottom. All of a sudden, here's a method with some kind of specific condition. Why is it here? Why is it relevant? This is a perfect opportunity to at least add some comments to help the reader. So what we can say here is creates a finder that matches we can say widgets of the given widget type, ensuring that the given widgets exist inside of an overflow bar. Now, and again, that might not be perfect, but probably if you think back to what was in your head before we started writing this, and I told you to go read a test and you came across this comment, that's probably giving you a much better chance of understanding this inline function than no comment at all.
Definitely. Any comment, any documentation helps.
Okay, so with that, now do you think we need any other tests for this example, or is this one test for the buttons good enough to cover the example as it is?
In this case, it is fine. Like we don't have any other like essential functionality to test. So in this case, the example loads, we have the buttons, and we expect the overflow bar to contain this button. So this is good to go.
Okay, great. Now, we talked about maybe doing a few other tests. I think given the time we spent on this one, it's probably actually more valuable if we show people how they can put up a pull request with even just a single test.
Yeah, definitely. Let's go do that. So we have the changes. So we should create a new branch before we commit these changes.
And it's always good to check your status, because we thought that we only made changes under a new test directory. So now I'm making sure that that is the only thing we've done. But as Taha said, we're currently on master, can't commit to master. So we will check out a branch. Now, I will say something really quick about this. Usually, if you're working on something, there is even an issue ticket here, but it's an issue ticket that covers a lot of stuff. But let's say you're working on an issue ticket and it's number, and that's the number on GitHub for the issue ticket. I try to always begin a branch with the number and then an underscore and then some description of what we did, so that you can look back at your branches in the future and quickly find out which branch were you working on for a given ticket. And we can do that in this case as well. If we come back to the original ticket, here's the ticket that lists all these things that need to be done. And that is number 130,459. And what we can say add test for OverflowBar example. Now, some people think that taking just a few seconds to give a branch a decent name is too much. They'll just give it a couple words and move on. I think it only takes a few seconds. It costs almost nothing. And now you and anybody else looking at this branch have some idea of what's in here based on just the branch name. So now we've checked it out. Now, if we say get status, we are on the branch that we just created, and we still have the uncommitted changes. So with that, Taha, what's the next step?
We need to add these changes and commit with a readable description, because it will become the PR
Taha
title.
Again.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, Taha, now I can hear you back again. So now that we've created the branch, do we want to commit these changes?
Yes, we need to commit these changes with a meaningful description so that it becomes a PR title.
So we'll do git add all, because we've already verified that we only have the changes we want, and we've checked git status now. We've now we've staged those for commit. So now we'll say git commit m. Can you give us an example of what a useful commit message would be in this case?
In this case, we're just adding a missing test for OverflowBar. So we could add.
Do you prefix it with anything? For example, do you ever do something like examples like that and then say what you did, or do you just go right into the description?
No, I like to just provide a description, but it depends on your style. You can do like an example link or the widget.
Well,
name.
like you mentioned, for consistency, if the standard is not to include examples in brackets, then we can leave that out of there.
No, the PR title commit is just for you, because when the PR merges, it's gone. So the consistency is for the source code.
Why is it gone?
Because it's your branch. You can delete it. It's fine. But
when it merges, unless you're suggesting that we change after getting approved, by default the commit that is merged in is the commit that we write right here.
Yeah, I understand that, but it's just a test in this case. So we are not introducing a new feature or a bug fix. So this is less lenient than like adding a bug fix or introducing.
I just want to be clear on one thing. You said it doesn't matter because it's our PR and it's just for our PR. But I want to be clear, it's not just for our PR. When we merge our PR in, this message will appear in the global history for Flutter, right? Did that come through? Did I break up?
No, I didn't get any of that.
Okay. So what I was trying to verify is that when we put up our PR and we merge it in, this commit message actually will be added to the global history of Flutter, right?
Yes, but the prefixes or like a certain pattern is not necessary. Like you could say add missing test, or if you could say overflow bar then missing test. The format doesn't really matter. If you're say like introducing a new feature, then you should like provide like, okay, we are introducing this new feature, mention the name of that feature. But in this case, this is not really necessary.
Okay.
You're just saying
Added
like we're
missing
adding
tests for overflow bar example.
That's it. Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. And then we will, now this branch only exists locally. So we will push, now Taha, we do have two repositories here. So we're going to push to origin and then do a pull request over to the main Flutter, right? I'm just unfortunately the audio just keeps cutting in and out, so I'm just going to have to go do what I think makes sense here. Taha, I can hear you again now. What I'm going to do back in my version of Flutter, you'll see that GitHub already saw that we pushed that branch. I'm going to say compare and pull request. Now the question is, where does it go? By default, it's already suggested that we go to Flutter master in the real Flutter repo, which is exactly where we want to be. So here's the title from our commit.
Perfect.
Now, I guess, I don't know, maybe it auto-generates this for everyone. Given I'm in the organization, I wouldn't think that it needed this checklist. But I guess, Taha, do you go check all these off, or do you just replace all this with a description?
I do check this off, and it's same for everybody. It doesn't matter if you're an organization member or a new contributor. So you could mention the issue that it is fixing, but you just mention it. Don't say fixes. Otherwise, you'll close the issue.
Yeah, and normally you would want to say resolves if you actually resolve it, but because there are a huge number of these missing tests, we have not completed that ticket. Okay. Okay, and then...
Could add X in the boxes,
Sure, we'll pretend that I've done all these things.
You can leave there. They are hidden, so they will not show up.
Okay, and we can preview it. So this is what's going to be displayed. And we can also see our changes even before we put up the PR. The only change, we added one file, and it's the file right here, the test file that we wrote. All right. So then we will say, is there anyone that we should choose for assignment, or do we just send the PR and wait for the team to find someone to assign?
You could file this, assign me. I will review your PR.
So now I want to make sure we equip the average developer out there. If someone is adding tests like this, or they're working on examples, should everyone tag you, or what's the standard thing that people should do?
Standard, like you just leave the PR open. If somebody who is responsible to review that area of the Flutter framework would come to that PR and review it. But if you know somebody, like for example, if you have been filing example tests, this is not your first one, for example. You know somebody who previously reviewed your PR. You could assign that same person because they have reviewed similar PR in the past. So if you worked on several examples, you know that somebody reviewed it previously, you just assign them directly. Otherwise, leave it and somebody will come and review that PR. So you don't have to find people and assign them. It's not necessary.
So now we're already apparently out of date, which happens constantly.
How does one... fine.
Okay, so we just, even if someone sees this, they shouldn't feel like they have to update. They'll just leave it, and because there aren't any merge conflicts, once we get approval, we can merge in.
Yes.
Okay. You'll also notice that there are all these things, all of these CI tasks that are running. They do a number of things, but many of these are just running tests for different platforms on servers. All of these will have to get a green check mark before you're allowed to merge in. So not only do you need approval from the team, you need what's called the build needs to go green on all of these different tasks. If any of them fail, and sometimes it's not even your fault, but if any of them fail, something has to get corrected before you're allowed to merge in.
Yes. This is what I like about PR contribution, because there are so many tests there, and it makes sure that nothing breaks. Like your changes are verified in a whole set of platform. And then if you make unintended changes, like if you have trailing spaces, we talked about in the last video, or if you have some missing tag, it will catch that. You might not catch it locally because you don't have any local tests for these, but they will be caught in the text, in the checks, and then you can review those changes and fix your PR. That makes sure that your example is correct, your code is correct, you don't have any analyzing issues. So it really helps. It takes an hour or like 40 minutes to run the whole checks, but you don't have to do anything. From this point, you're done. Once you file a PR, as long as it is not failing, you are fine. If it fails and you can read the error, you can fix it yourself, or the reviewer will ask you to fix something.
Okay, so we're not going to wait for all of this to complete because it could take a very long time. Instead, what will happen is after this video, this should all go green. Taha will then come in, because I requested his review. Taha will come in and he will give the approval on this PR. And then at that point, this squash and merge will go green, and I can tap it and it will add it to the overall Flutter history. So that's, I think, a good kind of ending point for this video, where we've covered where the examples live. We've talked about how to find a given example. We've talked about how to add a brand new test file for a given example. We've talked about what you might want to actually verify in a given example, and even how to put up a pull request. In the next video, maybe we'll take up a tiny little bug or maybe a tiny little feature that Taha and I will figure that out offline. But this should give you guys a good starting point for basic contributions. Taha, do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up today?
I think we had a very good introduction on how to locate the source code, how to figure out a simple test. And we also discussed ways to test a same example. We have discussed the meaning of the test, why we are writing tests, what is the purpose of writing this test. And we have also shown even if you write an ineffective test, how can you fix that test, And we showed a wrong way, and then we showed a correct way. And you also showed how to create a branch. This is perfect for anybody starting to just think about these questions. And you don't get answers. You don't get answers to this question when you're looking for a first contribution, how to title my test, how to add a widget in my test. And I think this is a great video for those people. And thanks for having me. Thanks for the video. Sorry for the connection issues. If you scroll up, I just approved this PR because this is a very simple use case. So, and I've worked on this test with you, so I know the changes. But in most cases, when you file a PR, just sit back, relax. Somebody will review it. And once you get started and you get familiar with this process, it becomes fun. It becomes familiar. And you will know what to do. And there is no one way. There is multiple ways. I have my way, then you have your way. Both of them are correct. If you file a PR, it is as just valid as my PR.
Great. All right, well, Taha, it's been great having you here. I appreciate you taking the time. Again, this video series is brought to you by the Flutter Bounty Hunters. My name is Matt Carroll. I am Chief of the Flutter Bounty Hunters, and we'll see you in the next video where we continue to build Flutter.